Hi, I'm Michelle. Welcome back to Finally Revealed. Hey, I want to thank everybody who's subscribed and everyone who has sent in comments and the thumbs up. It's really appreciated. I hope that this is helpful. And if there's ever anything that you wonder about that we can provide a video for you or other explanation, let us know. Okay? In today's video, I'm going to go there. We're coming up on the presidential election. And there are deadlines that people are not always aware of. And in particular, if you're moving from state to state, a friend of mine got caught up in that the last time, and it can be a pain. So I want to give you a little bit of heads up because in some places, registration times are already expiring. And if you're not going to be available on the day of the election, and you know it already, then there are absentee provisions you can take advantage of. So in this video, I want to talk about registration because except for North Dakota, you have to have registered in order to vote on election day. So I want to make sure that you know when it is so that you can plan for it, okay? Now, the Secretary of State of each state is the officer in charge of the voting, and they have all of the rules and regulations. Then it's turned over to the local county for implementation. And so there's usually a county election office where you live that will handle the actual paperwork. Some of the registration can be done in person, sometimes it can be done online, sometimes it can be by fax, and sometimes it can be by mail. So some of the states have different deadlines for registration depending upon how you register. So I'm going to cover those, and I'm going to go through all 50 states, and I will leave in the description of the video, I will leave the timestamp for when your state is mentioned, if it makes it easier for you, if you don't have time to listen to all of them and you don't want to learn this trivia. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Alabama, the deadline is 14 days before Election Day. Alaska, it's 30 days. Arizona, 29 days before election is the cutoff for registration. Arkansas, it must be postmarked 29 days before the election. That means when it's stamped, if you have a postage meter, it has to read that date 29 days in advance, or it has to be canceled at the post office. That's what postmarked means. California, it must be postmarked 29 days before. California, either electronically or postmarked, it needs to be 15 days before. So it needs to be postmarked if you're mailing it, and if you're sending it in electronically, it has to be on the 15th day, okay? Colorado, the deadline for registration is 8 days before the election. The deadline for registration to vote in Connecticut is 7 days before the election. Registration in Delaware to vote closes on the 24th day before the election. In the District of Columbia, your voter registration has to be postmarked 30 days before the election. In Florida, it must be postmarked 29 days before the election if you want to vote in that election. In Georgia, your registration to vote has to be received 28 days before the election. In Hawaii, your voter registration has to be postmarked 30 days before the election. In Idaho, your registration has to be postmarked 25 days before the election. In Illinois, your registration has to be, if it's mailed in, has to be postmarked 27 days before the election, or you can register in person on election day. That's Illinois. In Kansas, your registration to vote has to be received 21 days before the election date. In Kentucky, your registration has to be postmarked 29 days before the election. In Louisiana, your registration has to be postmarked 30 days before the election, or electronically or in person, it has to be received on 30 days. So if you're If you can't get there on the 30th day, but you can put it in the mail on the 30th day, you obviously have to have it in advance to do that, but that helps you. Maine, it has to be your voter registration has to be received 21 days before the election. In Maryland, your deadline to register to vote is 21 days before the election. For Massachusetts residents, if you postmark it, if you're mailing it, it has to be postmarked 20 days before the election. If you're doing it online or in person, it has to be done and sent on the 20th day before the election. Michigan gives you 10 more days. In Michigan, you have to have your registration postmarked 30 days before the election. If it's online or in person, the deadline is 30 days. That's for Michigan. For Minnesota, the deadline expires to register to vote 21 days before the election. Mississippi, your registration application or voter registration has to be postmarked. In Mississippi, the deadline for voter registration it has to be postmarked 30 days before the election. Missouri, there's a little trick here. Missouri, it has to be postmarked before the 4th Wednesday before the election. So Missouri makes you have to try a little harder. Montana, at 5 p.m., 30 days before the election, voter registration expires, except you can do it in person on election day. That's Montana. Nebraska, you have to have it postmarked by the 3rd Friday before the election. That's Nebraska. For Nebraska also, if you're going to do it in person, that deadline to register to vote is 6 p.m. by the 2nd Friday before the election. So Nebraska has a two-part. For Nevada, it has to be postmarked 31 days before the election. For online or in-person registration in Nevada, listen carefully, this is online or in person for Nevada, your deadline is from the 5th Sunday through the 2nd Thursday before the election. New Hampshire, the voter registration deadline is 10 days before the election. For New Jersey, your voter registration must be received by 21 days before the election. New Mexico, your voter registration must be postmarked 28 days before the election, or it can be received if it's sent in another way, 28 days. So postmarked if it's mailing, so it's going to get there later. If it's electronic or in person, the 28th day is your deadline, and that is for New Mexico. For New York, it must be postmarked 25 days before the election. North Carolina, it must be postmarked 25 days before the election. If it's in person, you have from the 2nd Thursday to 1 p.m. on the Saturday before. That's for in-person registration in North Carolina. And there is some litigation about that, but that's what it is right now. North Dakota, I said at the start, there is no voter registration for North Dakota. For Ohio, it must be postmarked 30 days before the election. For Oklahoma, the voter registration must be postmarked 25 days before the election. For Oregon, 21 days before the election, the voter registration cutoff is. For Oregon, the voter registration cutoff is 21 days before the election. Pennsylvania, your voter registration must be received 30 days before the election. Rhode Island, your voter registration must be postmarked 30 days before the election. South Carolina, your registration must be postmarked 30 days before the election. Tennessee, your registration must be postmarked 30 days before. And I need to back up, I forgot somebody. South Dakota, your voter registration must be received 15 days before the election. Texas, it must be received 30 days before the election if you want to vote. Utah, your voter registration must be postmarked 30 days before the election, or in person or online, your deadline is 7 days before the election. Vermont, your deadline to register to vote is 5 p.m. on the Wednesday before the election. Virginia, for mailed-in registration for voting, it's 22 days before the election, or online or in person, the 22 days is also the deadline again. So if you're mailing it, it has to be put in the mail by the 22nd day. If you're doing it online or in person, you actually have to do it by the 22nd day. For Washington, it must be postmarked the 29th day before the election, or if it's in person, 8 days if you're a new Washington voter. So you can do it in person up to 8 days before the election if you just moved into Washington state or had your birthday and now you're eligible, and otherwise you couldn't make it before the 29th day. West Virginia, your voter registration must be received 21 days before the election. For Wisconsin, your mailed-in voter registration must be there 20 days before the election. If it's in person, you've got until 5 o'clock the Friday before the election. And Wyoming, the deadline is 14 days before the election. So everybody should get your calendar out, go back and look at the list. If you're moving, figure out what those dates are. If you have not registered to vote, you're now 18. Welcome to the world and the world of voting, and get registered if you want to vote, and hopefully you want to, because it's a privilege and not everyone has it. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope the process is not too tough on you, but you can do it, and it's good to participate. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. If this was helpful, share it with someone and give us a thumbs up and subscribe for our future videos. Thanks.